Hello, and thank you for joining us today for this Chemical Week Argo FSO webinar on the very timely and relevant topic of seizing opportunities in challenging times, in particular strategic countermeasures for enhancing profitability and positioning for growth. I am your host, Gregory Morris with Chemical Week. I have served as Gulf Coast Bureau Chief and Global Markets Editor for the publication, and I'm delighted to be accompanied today by three industry experts. Our guest star is Trevor Williams, who is Executive Vice President of Nitrogen and Phosphate at the global agricultural chemicals company Nutrien. We're also joined by Chuck Dees, who is Senior Vice President and Partner in the Chemical Process Industries at Argo FSO, and by Mike Matlock, who is Senior Advisor for the Chemical and Process Industries, also with Argo FSO. A couple of quick housekeeping details. We are not live, we are on video, so I don't have to tell you where the safety exits are. But I will tell you that this presentation will be archived indefinitely, and I would urge everyone to go back and review it carefully. That's not necessarily a homework assignment. The reality is we'll be presenting a couple of highlights from a survey that Chemical Week and Argo FSO conducted recently. There's an awful lot of rich information there. I wrote an article that appeared in the magazine that is also available if you would like it, hitting some of the highlights, but there's a lot there to digest, and we'll only have an opportunity to hit a couple of the highlights today. So please go back and take advantage of that. Also, we have some discussion topics after the brief presentations, and we will save time for live Q&A from the audience. That said, we probably will not have time to get to everyone's questions, so please don't be discouraged or let that dissuade you from asking questions. Use the chat box on your screen to ask any questions that you may like. We will be sorting the questions as they come in. We will get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation, but everyone who asks a question, we will definitely get back to you after the presentation is over, so don't be shy. With that, I'd like to plunge ahead with the overview here. If you will, hang on. That's us, and here we go. Chemical Week and Argo FSO recently surveyed chemical executives. I had the opportunity to speak to many, including Trevor, in person. And the findings were remarkable, I have to say. Companies are starting to learn from previous downturns that they cannot ever cut their costs, cut their way to efficiency, or cut their way to profitability. As was told to me, the down cycle is actually the best time to eliminate non-value-added activities, to optimize both the cost structure, sure, but also to optimize the process. You know, you can't fix things or change things when you're running flat out, you know, that's the ideal time to take a turnaround or to upgrade your equipment. So it almost goes back to what Warren Buffett said about be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful. So yeah, this is not a new concept, but the industry is learning to apply it in terms of strategic planning and also process optimization. If you have a look at, this is busy, and this is why I said, please come back and review the material in the archives. We have a lot going on here. I wanted to call your attention to an interesting dichotomy here in the very first question one. What is the current level of satisfaction with business performance? And you can see that a slim majority, were satisfied or somewhat satisfied, which is great. But at the same time, a plurality, the single largest group, was dissatisfied. So you could say there is consensus, but that glosses over the reality that there's a lot left to be done. If you look at the second pie chart there and the third one, it's all over the place. Look at question 3. What quick hit opportunities do you have? It's a pinwheel. Round and round and round she goes. Some people do this, some people do that. So there isn't a lot of consensus yet, and that's what we're going to try to address in today's presentation, is how to make sense of all of this, and what are your options, and what are your how do you determine among your options. Key takeaways, and again, come back and review this, please, after we're done. Again, if you look at question 4, consolidation was not a big deal. Asset optimization, reliable production, steady on. That was, that and integrated business planning. Be brave when others are fearful. Become the reliable supplier, become the reliable customer to your supplier. The only clear consensus here, very briefly, is very important for operational excellence. 60%, 2/3, and everyone else said either very important or somewhat important. So there's a clear mandate to that. The question is just, how do you get it done? And with that, I would like to hand the proverbial microphone over to Trevor, who will talk about some of the ways that Nutrien has implemented some of these concepts and some of the learnings that have taken place at his operations. Trevor, what have you got to say for us?
All right, thanks, Gregory. Appreciate the opportunity. It might be an echo there, but hopefully it'll go away here in a second. Yeah, anyway, I really appreciate the opportunity, folks, to have a bit of a discussion about, something that is probably one of the most challenging things we do in any of our businesses is really how we tackle the holy grail of operational excellence. And what I thought we'd do today is hopefully share a little bit about what we're doing at Nutrien, and maybe have a bit of a discussion here at the end in terms of maybe what others are thinking as well. With that being said, again, Trevor Williams, I'm the president of our nitrogen and phosphate facilities with Nutrien. And just a little background in terms of who Nutrien is, for those who may not know us. Nutrien is the global leader in both the production and distribution of crop inputs and services. Obviously, serving the farmers ultimately in terms of what we do and how we go about it. Now, with that being said, Nutrien from a footprint perspective, we have 26,000 employees spread across our global facilities. We produce over 26 million metric tons of product, obviously that we distribute through our various supply chains. Produced through about 20 different facilities scattered throughout North America, South America, Australia, etc. And really, we have that reach into the farmer, into the local communities with over 2,000 different retail facilities, again, across our network. So it really gives you a bit of perspective. What I do like to say is a lot of times, Nutrien is one of the biggest companies you may never have heard of, but from our perspective, one of the most important is our goal is obviously to help support what we call feeding the future from an agricultural perspective. Now, with that being said, at the core of what we do, and a part of our strategy is that we have two parts of our business. One obviously is the wholesale side, and I talked about we have about 20 production facilities in terms of the manufacture of potash, phosphate, and nitrogen products. And obviously integrated from end to end in terms of supplying that through our supply chain to farmers through our retail network. Now, as we think about, and Gregory did a really good job in terms of kind of setting the framework around, when you think about operational excellence, what do you consider to be the elements, and what are the parts that you consider to be the most important? And for us, this is how we look at it from a Nutrien perspective, in particular in the N&P side. And for those who are maybe not familiar on the nitrogen and phosphate, nitrogen essentially is a petrochemical process whereby we take natural gas, crack it, and then react it in order to produce ammonia and other downstream products. And on the phos side, we have a mine up front where we mine rock, and then a milling process and chemical process downstream. And the core and foundation of what we do is really founded on the 3 items or the 4 items you see here in front of us. And obviously, first and foremost would be safety. And that really pertains to both personal and process, which is no surprise to anybody in the operational area. Number 2 is reliability, at the cornerstone of what we do and how we go about it. And this is, again, what Greg talked about was, it's so important, and the foundation of what we do from an ops excellence strategy is really about the reliability and the productivity benefits you get of that. Efficiency for us is really, comes down to two pieces. One, obviously, is the cost side, which is critically important in terms of what we do. We have to manage as a commodity business, both our fixed and variable cost components, but as well, from a sustainability perspective, as we think about our pathway and our plans in terms of how do we manage our CO2 emissions, et cetera. And then at the bottom is really growth, and that growth is really about both the people we have in our organization and obviously what it allows us to do in terms of our assets, whether it's on the bottlenecks and expansions, et cetera. Now, instead of going through each one of those, I really want to just do a bit of a deeper look in terms of what we think about in terms of reliability. As, again, just going back to the survey and the questions, this ultimately, in terms of assuming that, assets are running safely from a personal process, reliability is really that linchpin, as you talk about in terms of the most efficient plant is a reliable plant. A plant that is running reliably typically is the one that's going to have the best cost structure. It's the one that typically is going to allow, when the organization has the reliable facilities, are the ones that can obviously, be prepared not only for the downturn, but obviously when things improve in terms of being able to come out of the downturn and hopefully back up to the peak of a cycle. When we think about reliability, there's really three components that are core in terms of what we do from a day-to-day perspective. The first part of that is really about what we think about in terms of why it's important. It's really that value proposition. It's the metrics. It's how do we measure our performance. It's in terms of what we do, in terms of our asset care strategies, with respect to how we manage our equipment, how we monitor, how we troubleshoot, how we maintain, et cetera, how we invest. But then the last part really is about how we do it. And it's really about work execution. And really, as you think about your asset life cycle, in terms of all the way from when you start a plant up to all the way through you run it, you optimize it, but ultimately in some cases as you decommission going forward. On the basis of all of that, though, that is really the breadstakes in terms of what we think about in terms of the base operation of the facility is how do we manage those day-to-day activities. But the part that we're really excited about and something that we've spent a lot of time on, both mastering the basics, which are really the elements I just covered, but then the next part is really how do you embed continuous improvement and innovation into what you do as well. And really, it's if you think about it in terms of the future, most of us, in terms of if you work or if you've been in the operational area for a long time, we have thousands and thousands of data points. We've collected millions of pieces of data, over the lifespan of our facilities, and mostly with the purpose or the design of collecting that data to understand what may have happened when something did happen. So a lot of it is looking backwards in terms of using data and information. And really what we took a view of about 3 or 4 years ago is really how do you take that data, instead of looking backwards, how do you look forwards? And so what we've really looked at in terms of the innovative component is, as on the N&P side, we have 10 facilities. We have 12 ammonia plants. We have 7 urea plants and so on. But one of the challenges we've had as an industry, as an aging workforce, people retire, and you don't have that same level of knowledge and expertise at your sites anymore. So we moved forward and put a bit of a vision together, and we're well on the way in terms of where we sit today. Is we've put in place what we call a real-time operations center, where we have the ability now to monitor every one of our facilities from a centralized location, whether it's rotating equipment, whether it's our water systems, whether or not it's our process operations on the ammonia side and the urea side, to really be able to help do the items around how do we troubleshoot, how do we optimize, and how do we support those sites with that expertise that's obviously difficult to have at every one of our facilities. Now with that, and obviously one of the things, if you would ask me, how would you staff a setup like this in the past, I never would have thought about, including data scientists as one of those core roles that sit in the support of an operations center like this. But they are the heart, because we now have our capabilities around using machine learning, using AI to help have those early troubleshooting, those early indicators of something going on. And now if you take that and then you really build the collaboration with the individuals who work at our what we call NROC, with the individual sites in terms of helping support them, both in terms of troubleshooting, but also in advanced heuristics and algorithms to help them know that they have a problem before they actually know they have a problem. And that's the part that I think is really neat in terms of when you think about operational excellence. It's evolved a lot over the years. There's some core components and pieces that have been the basis for the last 30 years. But really what's changed is how can we use data in different ways that have never been available to us in the past to be able to be smarter about how we operate our facilities. So hope that was a little bit insightful for you in terms of some of the things that we're doing. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chuck.
Thanks, Trevor. Hello, everyone. My name is Chuck Deese. I lead the chemical process industry practice for Argo FSO. And thank you very much for joining. Just a little bit about us. We are the #1 global operations strategy and performance improvement consulting organization. We're really a pure play in that space. That's our focus: operations, supply chain. You know, that's where we do well. We aim to be a trusted advisor to the leadership of those operations. We're about 1,000 consultants strong globally. We have 400 consultants in North America. And I think you'd find us to be very pragmatic, results driven, and I would say highly collaborative in working with our clients, right? It's about solving problems together. This happens to be our 7th webcast and piece that we've done with Chemical Week. We've actually been pretty proud that over the past few years, we've done a number of insight pieces with Chemical Week on, I think, very industry relevant topics as this one is here. So just a little bit about us and our background. Again, as I mentioned, our focus is operations. That's our capability. We bring deep expertise in that area. Most of our consultants are seasoned veterans from chemical process industry companies that have been there, done that, and you can see the list of clients on the right-hand side. So, let's get into sort of the theme of this, right? And we'll talk a little bit about our approach, where to look, and how to drive results. So from an approach standpoint, our advice is think strategically, right? And prepare well in advance. It was interesting, if you look back at the Chem Week survey, there was a question around kind of the areas that companies were focused on. And there's an initial wave around cost cutting and spend reduction, right? But to drive sustainable business process improvement, you really need to drive structural process changes, right, around work processes. And I think that's the message, right? So you can't, as Greg said, you can't cut your way out with cost reduction. This is all about, doing more with less, reducing waste. But you're going to get that through processes that you implement that are sustainable in the future. And we'll show you some case studies at the end that sort of will help you understand that. You guys, I think everyone is from the industry. You understand where the levers are, right? So it's all about profitable growth, maximizing the value levers. So that's sort of the high level approach. I'm going to turn it over to Mike, who's going to talk about where to look. And this is based on survey information. Mike, to you.
Yeah, good afternoon. When we look at opportunities, what I'd like to first, kind of start with is that this is a value slide, if you will, but it's also the effort slide. And so Chuck talked about levers. You heard some of those, at least in different initiatives that Trevor mentioned as well. And I think part of, your situation might vary a bit from this. This is our view with many, many customers and projects that we've done with them. In a relative fashion. I think it sort of boils down to sort of to the right. You say, well, but you put 9 items, but they really are sort of sequential. And it begins with fundamentals that I think, look, you see spend rationalization on the top left side of it. We know that there are times that you have to take care of a short term to get to a long term. But to standardize, start with those first processes to understand what does that base layer look like. Then, and only then, really, is then streamlining the organizational structure. Many companies will come in and try to change that organization almost as the first thing, but it really should be driven after the work processes really identify what are the deliverables, what are the roles as a part of that, and responsibilities. And so you build that out. And that includes also contractors. Contractors shouldn't be just an add-in. contractors should be a part of fulfilling a role that you've identified as important in the organizational structure. Trevor talked about reliability, and I think, look, asset plan, what does that look like? And then having robust reliability program that really drives that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. Dynamic integrated business planning. And so one of the things I wanted to comment about too is some, as you look at the opportunities to the left, are more, let's say, single function driven, but then the others are more enterprise driven. And so it's very important in the enterprise ones to make sure that you have commercial, procurement, all of those integrated into that planning to make sure that, hey, you can create the maximum value. Chuck will talk a little bit about performance management, but look, line of sight from the boardroom to the action level is making sure that one of the things we see a lot is people will immediately focus on KPIs, but what are the strategic objectives? What's the business strategy? And then making sure that all the way to the shop floor, that everybody is focused on what can they personally do and how will that be measured. Obviously, things like asset footprint optimization, utilization, a lot of effort on how do you address capacity? How can you get the existing assets, I call it capital efficiency? How can you make sure those are maximized, and then you can also then address much more adequately the asset footprint. Another area that we hit is really in turnarounds as we talk to clients, and I would say almost bar none, we always hear turnarounds are a problem for us. We're either overspent or we go over in duration. And so that's a tremendous opportunity that while you're handling other things, you need to really move in that area. Automation, digitization, predictive AI, I think, Trevor did a great job of covering that. That's always been something that we wanted to find out, and the traditional IPF curve is how can we predict that failure before that comes? So I'd call it the holy grail really of AI, is to get to the predictive side. And then the last part is, how do you engage everybody to know that I must do something and I can do something? And so that's that continuous improvement culture that we talk about. Next.
Thanks, Mike. So we talked about our approach, where to look. Now let's talk about how to get prepared. So there's really kind of two thoughts here. The first thought is, we need to understand where the value is, right? So let me just go back one slide there. So from a diagnostic standpoint, the assessment process is key, right? That's going to tell you where the value levers are. So, the advice is conduct a best run operations assessment. First of all, understand what good looks like from an operations standpoint, and then assess your operations work processes, right? Look at run plant, look at improved plant, look at maintenance, reliability, quality, your turnaround process, right? Have a lens in terms of what good looks like from an operations assessment process. Benchmarking is key, right? So, from benchmarks tell you a lot of things, but they also, one of the nice things is they give you a good lens around spend, right? What your spend should be on some of these process areas. So, putting time into benchmarking, I think, is very critical. And then the third area is, it's really twofold. It's looking at peers in terms of the way they run their businesses, right? And comparing yourself to peers. And also looking at best-in-class work processes. Back to asset operations, run plant. What's good look like in terms of a work process, and that's your benchmark in terms of where you want to drive to. So that assessment process is key, and I think that helps you kind of get to the point where you can build a compelling roadmap in terms of where to start and where to drive towards. The second, so that's sort of on the front end. You drive through the implementation phase, and we'll show you a couple of case studies. But I think the other important point here is a lot of companies, as they drive productivity around maintenance, reliability, asset operations, quality, they have good programs and processes in place, but they backslide over time. Trevor talked about attrition, aging workforce. You lose your line of sight in terms of what good looks like and what you set up initially. So that a robust performance management system is paramount to being successful. And I think a couple of things there. So you got to get the right KPIs, right? So it's got to start with the top and it's got to flow down. Has to be a combination of leading and lagging indicators, right? Very important. Management cadence has to be in place in terms of the way that process is meant to work on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And then the third area I think is important, often overlooked, visualization. The visualization piece is key to really understand on a more real-time basis where you are in terms of your performance, process performance, plant performance. We often find that the beauty about visualization on the shop floor is you get the operators engaged in the process. They're empowered to report out on how their unit's doing. And the beauty of that is you're driving accountability and ownership, right? So that, establishing that robust performance management system is absolutely critical in terms of sustaining future results. So just a couple of quick case studies, and then we'll get into the Q&A. This happens to be a more I would say targeted approach, right? We'll talk about targeted and strategic, from the matrix that Mike showed. So, this was a series of 4 petrochemical plants, but the focus was very targeted, transforming maintenance and reliability, right? So, this client happened to be bottom quartile, happened to have lots of issues around unplanned outages and lost profit opportunities. Really didn't have a good, stable, consistent maintenance reliability work process across the sites. The work here involved laying down the basic foundation of what a good maintenance plan, schedule, what a good work order looks like, making sure they're maximizing wrench time and right first time in terms of doing work, right? And then on the reliability side, it was an effective equipment criticality program, bad actor, PM optimization and things like that. I'd say that, when you really kind of put some thought and effort into implementing targeted programs, significant results, right? So you guys can see the results on the left-hand side. The biggest impact is cost reduction, right? It's pretty impactful in terms of the cost you can take out of the business and actually do work better by driving standard work and best practice work processes. The second area, I think, actually is in my opinion, is the crown jewel. Now, this is a more strategic approach, right? And we've had some good success working with companies across the industry in this area. I would say that, based on our experience, there are some leading companies that have done standard work well across operations, right? Across asset operations, improved process, quality, maintenance, reliability, and turnaround. And they've done well, but again, back to the earlier point about aging workforce attrition, they've lost their way, they've backslid, right? So we're in a number of situations where we're helping companies re-enable those standard work processes, those best practices. And then I think, based on our experience, for the most part, many companies have implemented targeted programs around maintenance or reliability, but when it comes to turnaround or run plant, improve plant quality, there aren't standards, right? So, there are disparate business processes. So, we would advocate efficient, repeatable, global standard business processes, leveraging best practices. If you look at the right-hand model on the side, that's what good looks like, right? There are well-defined process maps. What's the workflow? What's the work instructions? These are accelerators in our toolkit as we go into a client we start with, right? This is the pinnacle of what good looks like. So the other part of that, I would say, is around the organizational structure, right? So you want to look at clearly what's the best practice standard work process. Make sure that's well defined, articulated, and the organization, you've driven the cultural change and you're sustaining that. A big piece of that, though, is the organization. I think what we find in many sites, there's a different plant operations organization, right? The organization's different. So part of this activity is also having one organizational model for large plant, small plant, right? And then, that becomes your standard for the way that you're going to conduct your business going forward. And again, the point here is this is on the journey towards top quartile. It is a journey, but I think the best companies have implemented standard work and sustained that standard work, and that's what's driving results. And you can see some of the typical results on the left-hand side. And again, from a cost standpoint, significant productivity gains, as well as process improvements, implementing standard work. So I think that's Greg. I think that's all we have from the presentation. I think actually we're right on track. That leaves us 30 minutes with Q&A, and I'm going to turn it back to you.
I love it when a plan comes together. I'm old enough to remember the A-Team, so I don't. Thank you all. Really, really fascinating stuff. And what I appreciate on behalf of myself as a journalist, as well as our audience, is substantive. It's very easy when talking about these topics to get lost into the MBA mumbling and the sort of legalese and talking around the subject. So I very much appreciate on a professional and a personal level that we've all been so substantive. It would be, using terms like backsliding, let's call it what it is in some cases. It'd be an oversimplification to say it's just a matter of, if you start with cost cutting, operations suffer. But if you start with operations improvement, costs are automatically reduced. I mean, that's an oversimplification, but that seems to be sort of an undercurrent to this whole thing. So with that in mind, Trevor, let's talk a little bit in further detail about your experience and your guidance on how to reduce operating expenses in the near term without sacrificing long-term capability and recovery. As was said, in a couple of different ways. Sometimes you have to take care of the short term to get to the long term, but always keeping in mind that long-term capability. I'd love to hear what's going on or what has been happening at Nutrien, and then Mike, perhaps you could give a broader view, riffing off that across all of the companies that you've worked with.
Hey, thanks, Gregory. Hey, the interesting part is the challenge in this one is you have to, and you kind of said it earlier on, is you have to take the longer term view. One of the challenges in any of these kind of opportunities when you get into the bottom of the cycle and you're in a bit of a panic mode, one of the things we do is you can do irreparable damage in a short period of time that really prevents you from being able to take advantage of when things do get better. So, one of the things I would say from our perspective is, again, really looking at the long term in terms of where do you want to be at the top of the cycle so that you can go through both the good and the bad. But if you are in that situation where obviously you've got to make some decisions, one of the things that we've tried to do is be really, really clear about understanding your levers or your levers in terms of what the cause and effect is, because there's a number of different ways that you can improve. And I'll talk more about from an efficiency perspective and dollars per ton versus just absolute dollars. So is reliability where you're going to get your biggest bang for the buck? And if that's what it is, then that's where you should put your resources in terms of bringing your cost ratio down from a dollars per ton perspective. If it's an area where you've got very solid reliability, you've got really good embedded programs, then it might be something in terms of looking at structural and organizational type things. But the most important part is really understanding, and from our perspective, is what those levers are and what the cost, benefit, and risk is associated with playing with those levers. Because as we all know that whenever you make a decision, there are always impacts. And those impacts could be positive from a short-term perspective in terms of reducing some cost, but that may have a longer-term ramification if you decide not to do something. You've got a turnaround coming up and you decide not to do some work and puts that turnaround at risk. So the key parts again for me would be, one is take that long-term view, really understand what your levers are in terms of where you can have those improvements or you can have that influence, but really understand that risk, the cost benefit, so that you make a good informed decision.
I couldn't agree more, Trevor. I think on taking that longer term view, I think what comes to mind when we talk about this is really about driving costs, and I think it's a mindset, and it's a bit of, from a leadership standpoint, of what I call sort of steadying the needs. Is, I know there's tremendous pressure from stockholders, from clients, customers, et cetera, that impact and present that pressure. But I think really focusing on how do we engage people to start to drive those costs out. And I think we talked about that in the opportunity matrix that we had. There's an effort with it. So what's the horizon? And what's the investment that has to take place in order to make that happen? And then the ultimate risk that comes with it. So I think, as we talked about, I think what's really important for leaders to do, and we talked about in that sort of steadying, is to focus on the opportunity analysis itself and really understanding. Trevor talked about the levers that we have. Is what's the reality of what you face, and then what are the necessary things that you can take the resources that you have, because we don't have unlimited resources, but how can we, as Chuck talked about, targeted programs that we can go over that will result in a sustainable result. So I think that's our kind of view of it. There are times you have to go in very laser focused in certain areas, but at the same time building on the foundations that really go to that more sustainable future.
Thanks, Mike. It calls to mind a feature story that Chemical Week did ages ago on optimization, and the engineer that wrote that story, or that analysis, reminded everyone that at the highest levels, wherever you draw the circle for optimization, automatically imposes suboptimal conditions upstream and downstream of that. So if you optimize a pump, that may not fill the vessel upstream or downstream of it. So it's always a matter of, even when you're just dealing with the granularity, as you both said, that you always have to bear in mind the impacts outside what you're focusing on.
And one other thing I'd just add to that, if I could, Greg, is that I think
please,
we many times, I think what we struggle with, we're not effective communicators. And I think as we particularly work with folks in leaders in the manufacturing side, is not telling the story, not putting together the case, the compelling case of what may be what the mandates may indicate we should do versus what the risk. And we can relate stories that have occurred where, we've put that value on what that is with the risk, looking at consequence and probability, and then being able to communicate. If the enterprise makes that choice and goes, then we all understand. But I think there's a root to it that says we don't pull together the case and communicate as effectively as we should. So I just encourage everybody to do that.
Agreed. Thank you. Shifting gears just a moment, Mike, I'd like to go back to you with a question about just getting started. What are the key first steps to increase the ability to become a predictable and reliable supplier?
Yeah, so I think about, it's when we talk about predictable and then reliable, I've stated, in the past a bit of some organizations, and hey, I had some experience in that area and seeing that almost valued predictability over reliability. And I think we put them together is, we don't want to have predictable low performance, but nevertheless, it really begins as I think about sort of taking the steps and sort of simple steps to start. They aren't simple in terms of effort, but they're important. They're incredibly important. Is what's the current performance facing the reality of where you are? And I think one of the areas that we see real challenges in companies is around production loss accounting, is really to have a system in place that helps folks really understand, where are we in terms of gaps that may be present, okay? Even on the logistics side, the shipments, this gets to predictability, because I'm going to tie in two of those kind of opportunities that were on that chart that I showed. But where are you in commitments to be able to, you make a commitment to a customer and you deliver? That's the predictability. So a lot of CEOs in our discussions, a lot of leadership are saying, look, we want to be the preferred supplier to our customers, and that means we have to be predictable. And then we want to be able to improve in a way that they see us as very reliable. So the two that I think about are sort of a robust integrated S&OP to really understand what are the current capabilities and making sure that scenario planning is done with it. Robust planning is done to understand the impact and commitments to it. And then the other is really to begin to start to drive a reliability program. Trevor talked about work management as kind of the key. So maintenance, Chuck talked about operations. We need to operate the plant reliably. We need to maintain it in a reliable fashion. But I think, understanding the business strategy, the current performance, then drawing a picture of what do the gaps look like, and then what I find also in current performance that folks really struggle with and we don't see as effective as we would really like to see, we work with them about it, is effective RCAs and really getting to root causes so we're not band-aiding things, getting folks involved in simple problem solving, et cetera. What do your bad actors tell you? And that's a bit of driving in the rearview mirror, but it's incredibly important. But put a program like that in place, start to attack those, particularly if they have a sense of being very, very repetitive. And then the root of that, and I thought Trevor covered it very, very well as well, is an effective reliability program is versus the business strategy, versus the business deliverables, what's the criticality? And making sure it's not just an ABC ranking in an SAP or a system that you have, but it's really about understanding what's the probability, the consequence, and then what's the priority that we take off of that. So what's the associated risk and opportunity that you take doing that? And then the last part, which is really most key, is to prioritize and then resource adequately. Again, we talked about we don't have unlimited resources, so making sure that we're focused on the right opportunities and we're putting the right resources and bringing those to bear on.
Okay, great. Swinging back to Trevor now for a moment, I'd really like to talk about how those very same concepts are being not just implemented, but sustained. Trevor, can you tell us a bit about what kinds of benefits have yours and other leading companies realized from keeping on? Because many companies have undergone standard work process design and implementation, and as has been said a couple of times so far today, that many companies have backslid. So nobody hits it all day, every day, all the time. But tell us a little bit about how, about keeping on and keeping eyes on the prize.
Yeah, thanks. And I love this question because it touches a whole bunch of different components of what I call organizational entropy. It's a part of organizations in terms of standard work. People don't like to do things necessarily the same way all the time because they're always looking for ways to simplify or whatever the case is. But with that, I think about op excellence in terms of the benefits. I mean, the benefits are really, really clear. If you have a good, strong program, obviously the first part is on the safety side, both in the personal component as well on the process safety side. A great example, if you think about standard work and the standards that are out there around what, sets a structure around PSM as an example, and the elements that are covered under there. Around doing things as an example for life critical procedures. Those are great examples of standard work that you need to execute those every time, almost to a level of perfection, because if you don't, there's a high level of risk. It goes into the reliability side, obviously, because we're doing things in a way that is tried and true. It's been proven, whether or not it's how we maintain a piece of equipment, how we overhaul a piece of equipment. And one that I'll maybe just give a different perspective on is, and one that we put a lot of work on from a Nutrien perspective. We have 3 major turnarounds every year across our fleet. And the major turnaround is, 40 to 60 days. It's $50 to $150 million. And we do 3 of those every year across our organization. So for us, one of the biggest areas and focus around standard work is around turnarounds. And turnarounds is really about how do we make sure that we have the right checks and balances and steps to ensure that we go through the scope identification, the planning, the execution, the post-work, all of that done is in a very consistent way all the time, such that we can measure where we are, we can understand what the risks are, and we can obviously make course corrections early enough in the process if we're not necessarily where we need to be. So again, when we looked, and I talked a little while ago about understanding your levers and your impacts, when we looked from a reliability perspective and from a cost perspective and a capital perspective and resource, turnarounds are one of the most significant and complex things we do. Using standard work processes, and standard procedures really helped us to be more consistent in the outcome from a quality perspective and from a cost perspective, predictability and reliability. But there's one little catch here, is that, you know, whenever you do those kind of things, and I talked about organizational entropy, the part that you have to do is, first of all, okay, do you have the standard work processes and things like that? Obviously, that's step number one. Step number two is, are you using them? And are you using them consistently? And the next one after that is, how do you know? Because it's very easy, and somebody mentioned this a few minutes ago, to wander away from what those, and you need to have that constant force that helps to ensure that we are doing what we say we're going to do. And, you know, people in our organization, you know, I use this all the time, but trust but verify, trust but verification is a really, really key component of making sure that you're successful with any kind of standard work processes.
That's fascinating, and a real revelation. Having, you know, when I was Gulf Coast Bureau Chief for Chemical Week, I tried to get down into a plant, you know, sometimes on the Houston Ship Channel, sometimes farther away, at least once a month. And every time we would report on a turnaround, it was always treated, and this goes back, you know, 20 years, but maybe longer, but it was always treated as this special thing that was, you know, and clearly a lot of accidents and safety issues happen at startup and shutdown or turnaround. But that concept that you just talked about of treating turnarounds as standard operating procedure, this is something that we do across our operation all the time. It's part of a steady state business case, not some, you know, weird thing where everything is abnormal. It is normal. And that's a fascinating approach to that. So thank you for bringing that perspective. I wanted to stay with you for a second, and we had an excellent question from the audience that specifically is for you, Trevor. It says, what was the biggest challenge? And this sort of gets to what you were just talking about, which is why I wanted to insert it here. What was your biggest challenge to the setup of the NROC? And how was it formed? Did you put new employees? Was it the veteran people? And you know, you talked about the benefits, but how did you implement that as something different, but something that is going to support the process and not be sort of a thing unto itself?
Yeah, so Joao, I appreciate the question, and this is one of those ones where how we ended up, I'll say, stumbling across this was simply by getting a whole bunch of people together and talking about innovation, and we looked to the future around some of the challenges that we had as an organization. And the biggest part was really getting the group together to think about a way of looking at all the potential things that were, you know, would maybe get in our way of being successful, and how could we leverage technology. And so once we got to the spot where we started to say, hey, you know what, we can do things differently in terms of how we run our plants, how we optimize our plants, how we troubleshoot, how we work between, and that collaboration between plants. Once we got over that hurdle of understanding, you know, what we wanted to do and why we wanted to do it, it became almost self-fulfilling in terms of the level of interest and engagement and excitement about things that we could do in terms of being able to help support the operational organization. Now, with that, the NROC was formed with a combination of, we really relied on people internally. It's got to be something you own as an organization. It can't be something a consultant's going to do for you. We did use some folks to help us, especially on the technology side. So if you could imagine having every piece of, we started with a bit of a proof of concept. So we started with large rotating equipment, and we have very large compressors and turbines and gas turbines and steam turbines and across all of our ammonia plants. So we started with saying, you know what if we could be able to take all of the data, performance data that's going on in all of our plants and bring it to one location? That was step number one. We used Bentley, Nevada, so we had a system one, so we had a bit of a framework there. But making that real time, making it so that this central location was seeing the exact same data that the operational people were seeing. And as soon as we were able to show that proof of concept, that ability to be able to do this, it really then just started to, you know, that's step one. What was step two? Step 2 was really neat because we created digital twins for every one of our ammonia plants. So we have an online first principles model running beside how our plant is actually running. And it identifies for all those unit operations where we have deviations. So in that one, we had to bring some other people in. So a combination of existing employees, a combination of bringing the right kind of skill sets in. I talked about data scientists as being a really key role. I never would have thought about that probably 5 or 7 years ago. But the last one I would say is having somebody in your organization that really project manages this, that has that vision, that has that technical capability and knowledge, and can be really the one, because you're going to end up with lots of challenges and things, but really as a person that can problem solve and things like that. Now, the benefits for us have been outstanding in terms of, again, we're on a bit of a journey. We're moving on to the next phase, which is really using AI and machine learning. But by doing that initial stuff, it's really set us up in terms of longer term success. So, Joelle, if you're interested, I don't mind sharing a little bit. So if you wanted to reach out later on, I don't mind sharing a little bit more about kind of what we did and how we went about it. So, but for me, one of the most empowering things I think we've done as an organization to look into the future.
Wonderful. And let me throw it open just for a moment to Chuck and Mike. Can you talk more broadly about the importance of organizational design and role clarity and expectations and accountability, the way Trevor just talked about the setting up of this integral with his operation? What have you seen across other clients that you've worked with that have been in similar situations?
Yeah, I can take the lead on that. Maybe Mike, you jump in. So, I think we try to drive standard work, right? So, ideally one way of doing things in terms of run plant, improve plant, right? So, part of that is how you should be organized, right? So that organizational model goes with that standard work process, and I would say that what we found is that there's a myriad of organizations in terms of operations and plants, and there's a myriad of role descriptions, right, and work instructions. So our effort is really focused on defining that standard work, given the best practices that we bring, defining what that delayered organizational model should be, making sure that the right the role descriptions are in place and are consistent, right? Roles and responsibilities, I would say, are imperative to make sure that there's a clear line of sight and understanding on roles and responsibilities. Without that, companies quickly get off track. So, that one standard approach to the process, to the organizational model, to the roles and responsibilities, drive ownership and accountability, right? And then that gets measured with the performance management system that we talked about earlier, right? So, that would be critical. I think if we look across the industry today, and as we work with many sites out there, even within the same company, right, the organizational structure differs widely. And I think the more you can standardize, the more you can optimize and also get better at work processes and reduce your costs. Mike, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think there's an additional thing that impacts here as well is where is a company at in sort of its maturity? And we work with a number of companies. You'll see where they're very hierarchical, to others that have really moved to a shared leadership model and on a journey even to sort of self-direction or work-centered, as we like to call it. And so I think, how does the organization need to fit in order to be able to progress, to sort of tailor it to progress through that? Again, at all phases, making sure that you're giving, great role clarity with it. I think the other part is Chuck talked about the responsibilities, but I think there's also the enabling part is, training materials. What are the expectations associated with it? And then something we continue to hear, and I think is a challenge, is the accountability side. Is many times we if you think about sort of accountability and authorization and sort of the ability, is we'll authorize people to do things before we've really established and helped them with the ability and understand the accountability. So I think that's the part of standard work that we think is so empowering in many, many ways, is that you get that clarity up front and you're both enabling and empowering people to make the decisions within their work to not only operate in an effective manner, but then to improve.
Great, thank you. We've got about 5 minutes left, so let me swing back to Trevor to ask about the importance of robust asset utilization. In the commodity business, that's literally the bottom line. So if you would tell us a little bit about, you've got some massive facilities, you've got some smaller specialty facilities, so it's a good range across your fleet, as you said. Tell us about robust asset utilization, especially in terms of improvement plans and then production loss accounting.
Yeah, I'll keep this really quick, folks, but I'll give you an example for us as maybe tell a little story is the best way. But if you don't have, again, it all comes down to data. If you don't have the information that tells you where your problems are, it's really difficult to fix them. So an example for us is one of the things we've done is in the past, we have what we call our lost tons reporting, right down to every ton and every cause code that you can imagine in terms of being able to understand why we had, whether it was a piece of equipment failure, whatever the case is, and the specific one, and so on and so forth. There's a couple things we did, though. That's very much, I call it the tactical operational side. What made a big difference for us is when we took one step back from that and more from a leadership perspective and then said, okay, what's the data actually telling us? And how can we understand that data differently? And, two things for us. One is that we set some standards, and you have to decide, like RCFAs. Somebody talked about RCFAs. They are absolutely critical. The problem is you can't do an RCFA at absolutely everything because you'll never have time to do anything else. So you have to set that threshold of what is meaningful for you and make sure when you're going to do that RCFA, you do it really, really well so you truly get to root cause and you prevent that from happening. The next part is we put a process in place where over a certain threshold, those RCFAs get shared across all the other sites by the GM to the other GMs, site leaders, in order to be able to make sure that if we had failure in one spot, that we make sure everyone else is aware of it. The next one is taking that data, and I gave it a simple example was, for us, we have a lot of data, a lot of information, but we started to look at it in terms of buckets, so how do we go about it? And we ended up with 4 buckets. End of life, in terms of how we look at our lost data and things like that. One was end of life, and that's really driven on capital. Basic maintenance reliability, it's a lot of the OpEx stuff that we talked about here today. Quality, and that could be fabrication, it could be engineering, it could be design, it could have been installation. And then human factors. And human factors are, well, we maybe shot ourselves in the foot. When we started looking at data from those 4 categories, it really pointed us in a direction of what do we need to tackle and how do we need to go about it? Because it really helped us understand where we have strengths, but where do we have some vulnerabilities. So bit of a quick one there, folks, but just looking at it from not only just the detailed minutia, but taking that step back from a leadership perspective and looking at the bigger kind of picture.
Trevor, I was just going to add to that too. I think the other things that come to mind as a part of it, and you no doubt deal with them as well, is understanding the plant's capability. One of the things we see a lot is where customer specifications, you have production specs and customer specs are put in without a real understanding of what is the CPK or the process capability itself. And then you result in the quality aspect that you talked about, which reduces essentially capacity. And the other is, and it was on the opportunity chart, it may fit with some companies, a lot are going through it, it's very difficult, but there's high value to it, is SKU rationalization, where over time, SKUs get added to it that have differing rates, et cetera, that impact asset utilization. It's not just asset utilization, it's cost absorption. And many companies have not properly allocated that then gets to basically to margin. And so I think there's a number of things that are in addition to what he commented about that factor in here when you're looking at that impact.
Thanks, Mike. Chuck, bring us home. We've got about a minute left. Tell us, there are lots of companies, lots of company discussions on culture change and building employee ownership. So given what we've heard today, what do you think are the key initiatives that have achieved success for those top quartile companies?
Yeah, a couple of things, and I'll kind of keep it short. I think that it's getting that employee buy-in, right? So you can tell someone how to do it, or you can have them participate in the solution. Give you a good example. So, we're working with a client, and it's a major initiative to drive standard work across many, many plants, right? So that all started with designing the standard work for, again, back to run plant, improve plant, maintenance, reliability, quality, right? So we had, the best practice, right? But we didn't lead with that. We led with a session where we brought in operators that ran the plant for the run plant, maintenance planners, schedulers for the maintenance process, et cetera, right? And we drove brown papers, right? So we got them involved in looking at what their current state is, understanding what good looks like, and having them literally kind of map future state, right? So, getting the plant folks involved in that process development, they own it, they buy into it, that's key for sustainment. The second area, I think, real quick, is this performance management area. You can have the best performance, the KPIs and cadence and visualization, but what you really need to do there, again, it's get the shop floor involved in the report out process. Get the operators involved, right? If they're involved in reporting, they're going to want to improve that process and own that process, and that creates culture change and drives your business in the right direction in the future. So at the end of the day, it's getting your plant folks involved in your process improvement activities, as opposed to just communicating what needs to be done, right? That's a statement.
Splendid. Wonderful. We'll have to leave it there. Gentlemen, thank you for your time and your insight. There's so much richness to this topic. I appreciate your time today. We've only been able to hit on a few things. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us in the audience. And please, as we said, go back, review those slides, review the presentation, review your notes, and get back in touch with us if you have any questions. I very much appreciate all of you being with us, and thank you again. Have a safe rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.